January 17, 1943. A young technician stands in a freezing Virginia warehouse, holding a handful of yellow powder that will change the course of the war. Not uranium, not steel, eggs. Freeze-dried eggs that weigh less than a pound but feed a platoon. While German soldiers scrape frost from Stalingrad's walls to drink, and Japanese troops starve in Philippine jungles eating bark, American GIs eat scrambled eggs from powder, shipped across 3 oceans, stored for months, hot and ready at dawn. When Ernst Bergmann, a captured Wehrmacht private, sits in a POW camp and tastes eggs for the first time in 2 years, he doesn't cry because of defeat. He cries because he finally understands, America wasn't fighting a war. America was running a factory, and you cannot beat a factory with willpower. This is the story of how the Quartermaster Corps solved the most fragile problem in warfare, turned breakfast into a weapon, and fed the world with science, one reconstituted scramble at a time. January 17, 1943. The morning frost clings to the canvas tents at Camp Lee, Virginia, where the men of the Quartermaster Corps gather in a converted warehouse that smells of sulfur, starch, and desperation. Outside, the temperature hovers just above freezing. Inside, rows of stainless steel drums rotate slowly, their contents invisible but critical. A young technician named Harold Wesson leans over a tray of pale yellow powder, pressing a pinch between his fingers. It crumbles like ash. He adds water from a tin cup, stirs, and watches as the powder transforms, swelling, brightening, becoming something that resembles scrambled eggs. Not quite, but close enough. Close enough to feed an army that spans 3 oceans. Close enough to solve a problem that no one in human history had ever solved at this scale, how to feed millions of men in motion, across distances so vast that fresh food spoils before it can arrive, in climates so extreme that refrigeration is a fantasy. The problem is eggs. Always eggs. Eggs are protein. Eggs are moral. Eggs are breakfast, and breakfast is the meal that tells a soldier he is still human, still cared for, still connected to the world he left behind. But eggs are also fragile. They crack, they rot, they freeze in the Arctic and cook in the Sahara. By the time a crate of fresh eggs reaches a supply depot in North Africa or the South Pacific, half are broken, a quarter are rancid, and the rest are a gamble. The men complain. The officers complain. The complaints travel up the chain of command until they reach Washington, where a brigadier general named Edmund Gregory stands in front of a blackboard covered in logistical equations and realizes that the United States Army cannot win a global war on broken eggs. This is not a small problem. This is not a matter of convenience. In 1943, the United States military was feeding more than 12 million people, soldiers, sailors, airmen, marines, nurses, merchant mariners, scattered across every continent except Antarctica. They are in England and Iceland, Australia and India, Algeria and Iran, Alaska and Panama. They are on ships that take weeks to reach their destinations, in jungles where the humidity turns bread into mold within hours, in deserts where the heat warps metal and spoils meat. The logistics are staggering. Every day, the Army Quartermaster Corps must deliver 3 million meals. Every meal must provide 3,000 calories. Every calorie must come from somewhere, must be grown, processed, packaged, shipped, stored, and served under conditions that would bankrupt any civilian food company. And eggs are the breaking point, not because they are unimportant, but because they are so important that their absence demoralizes men faster than enemy fire. A soldier can endure cold, fear, exhaustion, boredom, but serve him the same canned hash 3 days in a row, and he begins to lose faith. Faith in the supply chain, faith in the men who sent him here, faith that anyone back home remembers he exists. Food is not fuel, food is memory. It is the taste of home, the smell of a mother's kitchen, the proof that civilization has not abandoned you. And in 1943, that proof is crumbling. So the Quartermaster Corps did something unprecedented. They invent a new form of matter. The science of dehydration is ancient. The Incas dried potatoes in the Andes. The Vikings dried fish in the North Atlantic. But drying is crude. Drying removes water by heat, and heat destroys texture, flavor, nutrition. Dried eggs are not new. Farmers have been making them for decades, but dried eggs are gritty, sulfurous, pale. They taste like chalk. They smell like chemicals. Soldiers call them rubber eggs, and refuse to eat them unless there is no alternative. By 1942, the alternative is no eggs at all. Enter the laboratories at the USDA in Beltsville, Maryland, and the experimental kitchens at Camp Lee, where chemists and food scientists are working on a process that sounds like science fiction, freeze drying. not drying by heat, but by cold. The principle is simple in theory, impossible in practice. You freeze the food solid, then you place it in a vacuum chamber, where the pressure is so low that ice turns directly into vapor, bypassing the liquid stage entirely. Sublimation. The water vanishes, but the structure remains. The proteins, fats, vitamins, even the color, preserved at the molecular level. The result is a powder so light it floats, so stable it can sit in a can for years, so complete that when you add water, it reconstitutes not into mush, but into something that looks, smells, and tastes like the original. It has never been done on an industrial scale. It has never been done with eggs. Eggs are liquid, protein, fat, volatile, temperamental. Freeze them wrong, and they turn into rubber. Dry them wrong, and they turn into dust. The chemists begin with small batches. They experiment with temperature, pressure, timing. They break 10,000 eggs and throw away 10,000 failures. They refine the process, calibrate the machinery, test the results on soldiers who grimace, spit, and occasionally, grudgingly, admit that it tastes like breakfast. By the spring of 1943, the first shipment of freeze-dried egg powder leaves the factory. 50 tons. Packed in cans, sealed airtight, stamped with instructions: add water, stir, cook. It travels by rail to the ports, by ship across the Atlantic, by truck into the supply depots of the 8th Air Force in England. The men are skeptical. They have been burned before by dehydrated carrots that taste like cardboard, powdered milk that clumps and sours, canned meat that smells like dog food. But orders are orders. The cooks open the cans. They add water. They stir. They scramble the mixture in cast iron pans over coal stoves. And the men eat, and the men stop complaining. Not because the eggs are perfect. They are not. They are slightly grainy, slightly pale. But they are eggs. Real eggs. Not canned. Not rubbery. Not rotten. The taste is close enough to home that it triggers memory, nostalgia, the ghost of a Sunday morning. The texture is soft, warm, recognizable. The smell is clean. The cooks begin to experiment, adding cheese, onions, peppers. The pilots eat before dawn missions over Germany. The mechanics eat between shifts. The nurses eat in field hospitals. And the word spreads: America has figured out how to send breakfast across the ocean. In the spring of 1944, a young German soldier named Ernst Bergmann is captured during the collapse of the Gustav Line in Italy. He is 23 years old, from a small village near Stuttgart. He has been at the front for 18 months, surviving on black bread, thin soup, and the occasional sausage that tastes more of sawdust than meat. He is marched to a POW camp near Naples, where American guards process him with the bureaucratic efficiency that bewilders every German prisoner. They take his name, his rank, his photograph. They delouse him, give him clean clothes, and then strangely, impossibly they feed him. The meal is scrambled eggs, toast, canned peaches, coffee. Real coffee, not the acorn substitute he has been drinking for 2 years. Ernst stares at the tray. He has not seen eggs in months. Eggs are for officers, for the Waffen-SS, for people who matter. He is a private. He is a prisoner. He is defeated. And yet the Americans are feeding him eggs. He eats slowly, expecting the food to turn sour, to reveal itself as some kind of trick. But it does not. It is warm, soft, and faintly salty. It is breakfast. He looks around the mess hall and sees other prisoners eating the same meal, their faces slack with disbelief. One man is crying. Another is laughing. A third is silent, chewing mechanically, as if afraid that speaking will break the spell. Ernst thinks about the last time he tasted eggs. Christmas 1941, before Stalingrad, before North Africa, before the world began to shrink and darken. His mother had saved 3 eggs for weeks, hiding them from the rationing officers, and she made a cake that was more potato flour than anything else, but it had eggs in it, and that made it precious. He remembers her hands, rough and red from cold, cracking the eggs into a bowl, and he remembers thinking that the war would be over by spring. It is now 1944, and the war is not over. Germany is losing. Everyone knows it, though no one says it. The propaganda still blares about final victory, about wonder weapons, about the Führer's genius. But Ernst has seen the truth. He has seen the supply lines collapse, the vehicles abandoned for lack of fuel, the soldiers marching barefoot because there are no boots. He has seen the rations shrink from inadequate to starvation. And now, sitting in an American POW camp, eating scrambled eggs made from powder, he understands something that propaganda cannot explain. America is not running out of anything. This is the revelation that breaks men. Not the bombs, not the tanks, not the endless waves of infantry. Those are expected. Those are war. But the food, the casual, inexhaustible abundance of food is incomprehensible. The German army has been hungry since 1942. The soldiers eat once a day if they are lucky. The bread is hard, the soup is thin, the meat is non-existent. They scavenge, steal, barter. They eat weeds, roots, insects. The officers hoard what little is left. The morale collapses not because of fear, but because hunger makes everything else irrelevant. You cannot fight when you are starving. You cannot believe in victory when your stomach is empty, and then you are captured, and the enemy feeds you eggs. Not just once. Every morning. The American cooks open cans of powder, add water, and make eggs for hundreds of prisoners. They do it without hesitation, without resentment. It is routine. It is logistics. It is the Quartermaster Corps fulfilling its mandate, to feed every person under American authority, enemy or ally, with the same 3,000 calories a day. The prisoners begin to realize that the eggs are not a gesture of kindness. They are not propaganda. They are simply what America does. America makes food in factories, ships it across oceans, and serves it to anyone who needs it. America has industrialized nourishment. Ernst talks to other prisoners. They compare stories. A man from the Eastern Front describes being captured by the Soviets, where prisoners are fed soup so thin you can see the bottom of the bowl, where men die of dysentery within weeks. A man from North Africa describes the British rations, which are better than German rations but still meager, bully beef, hard biscuits, tea. But the Americans are different. The Americans have fresh bread, canned fruit, powdered milk, and chocolate. They have Coca-Cola, which arrives in crates stamped with the logo of a soft drink company. They have cigarettes by the carton. They have ice cream, which they make in portable machines powered by generators. Ice cream. In a war zone, the prisoners begin to understand that they were never fighting a country. They were fighting an economic system. A system so vast, so efficient, so relentlessly productive that it can freeze-dry eggs, ship them across the Atlantic, and serve them hot to prisoners in Italy without ever running out. A system that does not ration, does not hoard, does not sacrifice. A system that simply makes more. Ernst writes a letter to his mother. The censors will read it, so he is careful. He does not mention the eggs. He does not mention the food. He writes only, "I am alive. I am safe. The Americans are not what we were told." He does not elaborate. He does not need to. She will understand. Everyone in Germany will understand, eventually. The war is already lost. It was lost the moment America decided to fight. Not because of courage or strategy or technology, but because America is a machine that runs on abundance, and abundance cannot be defeated by will or ideology or sacrifice. Abundance simply is. Back in the United States, the production of freeze-dried eggs becomes a national priority. The initial 50 tons become 500, then 5,000. Factories in Illinois, Ohio, and California retool from civilian food production to military dehydration. Women replace men on the production lines, cracking eggs by the thousands, separating yolks from whites, feeding the liquid into massive spray dryers and freeze dryers that hum day and night. The process is refined. The powder becomes finer, more uniform. The reconstitution improves. By 1945, the Quartermaster Corps was producing more dried eggs than the civilian market has ever consumed in fresh form. The innovation does not stop at eggs. The freeze-drying process is adapted for milk, potatoes, meat, and vegetables. The army begins to envision a future where entire meals can be dehydrated, stored indefinitely, and reconstituted in the field. The scientists talk about space exploration, about polar expeditions, about disasters and famines. They talk about a world where food is no longer perishable, no longer vulnerable to time or temperature. A world where hunger is a logistical problem, not an existential one. But in 1943, in that warehouse in Virginia, the problem was simpler and more urgent. The problem is keeping soldiers alive and fed and capable of fighting. And the solution, improbable, unglamorous, invisible to everyone except the men who eat it, is a can of yellow powder that weighs less than a pound and contains the protein of 24 eggs. The Axis powers never develop freeze-drying technology. They never develop industrial-scale dehydration. They never solve the problem of feeding armies across vast distances. Germany relies on local supply, on captured stores, on the fiction that conquered territories will feed the conquerors. Japan relies on rice, on fish, on soldiers who are taught that hunger is a form of discipline. Both systems collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. Germany's soldiers starve in the ruins of Stalingrad, scraping frost from the walls to drink. Japan's soldiers starve in the jungles of Burma and New Guinea, too proud or too indoctrinated to surrender, dying slowly of malnutrition and disease. The propaganda tells them that the enemy is weak, decadent, spoiled by luxury. The propaganda does not tell them that the enemy has freeze-dried eggs. In the summer of 1945, a Japanese officer named Lieutenant Yamamoto Kenji surrenders on the island of Luzon in the Philippines. He has been fighting for 3 years, cut off from resupply, living on jungle roots and whatever rice his men can scavenge from abandoned villages. He weighs 98 pounds. His uniform hangs from his frame like a shroud. His teeth are loose from scurvy. He is 27 years old and looks 50. When the American soldiers find him, they do not shoot. They do not interrogate. They feed him. The meal is scrambled eggs, toast, canned pineapple, coffee. Yamamoto stares at the tray. He has not tasted eggs since leaving Japan. He has not tasted sweetness, warmth, or softness. He has been eating bark and insects and, once, during the worst months, something he does not allow himself to remember. He eats slowly, mechanically, his stomach cramping after weeks of near starvation. He eats until he vomits, then eats again, because his body does not remember how to stop. He asks the interpreter where the food comes from. The interpreter shrugs. From America, he says. We make it in factories. Yamamoto does not understand. Factories? For eggs? The interpreter explains. The eggs are dried, powdered, and shipped in cans. They last for years. They feed millions. Yamamoto listens and realizes that everything he was taught about American weakness, about American softness, about the superiority of Japanese spirit, was a lie. Not a misunderstanding. A lie. Because a nation that can turn eggs into powder, ship them across the weight of their own contradictions. Germany's soldiers starve in the ruins of Stalingrad, scraping frost from the walls to drink. Japan's soldiers starve in the jungles of Burma and New Guinea, too proud or too indoctrinated to surrender, dying slowly of malnutrition and disease. The propaganda tells them that the enemy is weak, decadent, spoiled by luxury. The propaganda does not tell them that the enemy has freeze-dried eggs. In the summer of 1945, a Japanese officer named Lieutenant Yamamoto Kenji surrenders on the island of Luzon in the Philippines. He has been fighting for 3 years, cut off from resupply, living on jungle roots and whatever rice his men can scavenge from abandoned villages. He weighs 98 pounds. His uniform hangs from his frame like a shroud. His teeth are loose from scurvy. He is 27 years old and looks 50. When the American soldiers find him, they do not shoot. They do not interrogate. They feed him. The meal is scrambled eggs, toast, canned pineapple, coffee. Yamamoto stares at the tray. He has not tasted eggs since leaving Japan. He has not tasted sweetness, warmth, or softness. He has been eating bark and insects and, once, during the worst months, something he does not allow himself to remember. He eats slowly, mechanically, his stomach cramping after weeks of near starvation. He eats until he vomits, then eats again, because his body does not remember how to stop. He asks the interpreter where the food comes from. The interpreter shrugs. From America, he says. We make it in factories. Yamamoto does not understand. Factories? For eggs? The interpreter explains. The eggs are dried, powdered, and shipped in cans. They last for years. They feed millions. Yamamoto listens and realizes that everything he was taught about American weakness, about American softness, about the superiority of Japanese spirit, was a lie. Not a misunderstanding. A lie. Because a nation that can turn eggs into powder, ship them across the technology or wealth or resources, though America has all of those. The secret is the belief, the almost religious conviction that abundance is a right, not a privilege. That no one should go hungry if hunger can be prevented. That logistics is not a boring necessity but a moral imperative. The Quartermaster Corps does not see itself as feeding an army. It sees itself as feeding humanity. And in that difference lies the entire ideological chasm of the war. The Germans and Japanese built their empires on sacrifice. On the idea that strength comes from enduring hardship, from accepting deprivation, from proving that you can survive on less. The propaganda glorified hunger as discipline, rationing as virtue, suffering as character. The soldiers were told that the enemy was weak because the enemy was comfortable. And then the soldiers were captured, and the comfortable enemy fed them eggs every morning, and the entire ideology collapsed. Because you cannot glorify sacrifice to a man who is starving while his captors are eating scrambled eggs. You cannot praise endurance to a man who watches American soldiers throw away food because they are tired of it. You cannot preach spiritual superiority to a man who realizes that his suffering was not noble, was not necessary, was not even effective, that it was simply the result of a system that valued ideology over logistics, will over production, myth over reality. By the end of the war, the United States military has produced more than 60 million pounds of freeze-dried egg powder. Enough to make 2 billion eggs. Enough to feed every soldier, sailor, and marine in the Pacific and Europe, plus the prisoners, plus the liberated civilians, plus the refugees. The cans sit in warehouses from Manila to Munich, stacked in pyramids, stamped with expiration dates that will not arrive for years. After the war, some of the powder was sold to civilian markets. Some are donated to relief organizations. Some are stored in government depots, waiting for the next emergency, but the real legacy is not the eggs. The real legacy is the proof of concept. The proof that food can be engineered, that scarcity can be solved, that abundance is not a natural state but a choice. The freeze-drying technology developed for eggs spreads to coffee, fruit, meat, and entire meals. It becomes the foundation of space food, survival rations, disaster relief supplies. It becomes the reason astronauts eat freeze-dried ice cream on the moon, why hikers carry lightweight meals into the wilderness, why famine relief organizations can ship nutrition across continents, and it all begins with eggs. With a problem that seems trivial, how to send breakfast to soldiers overseas, and becomes the blueprint for industrialized nourishment. The Quartermaster Corps does not set out to change the world. It sets out to solve a logistical annoyance. But in solving that annoyance, it invents a new form of food, a new relationship between humanity and sustenance. It proves that technology is not just about weapons or machines, but about the mundane, essential work of keeping people alive. In 1947, 2 years after the war, a German journalist named Heinrich Böll interviews former soldiers about their experiences in American POW camps. The interviews are part of a larger project about the war, about memory and trauma and guilt. Böll expects stories of interrogation, humiliation, and propaganda. Instead, he hears about food. One man describes eating scrambled eggs for the first time in 3 years and weeping because he had forgotten that food could taste like something other than survival. Another describes gaining 30 pounds in 2 months, his body shocked by the sudden abundance of protein and fat. A third describes asking the American cooks where the food came from, how it was made, why there was so much of it. The cook shrugged and said, "We just make it. That's what we do." Böll writes an essay about the interviews. He calls it, "The Bread of the Enemy," though he knows the title is wrong. It is not bread. It is eggs. But eggs do not have the same metaphorical weight as bread. Eggs are not biblical. They are not symbolic. They are just eggs. And that, Böll realizes, is the point. America does not need symbols. America has eggs. Powdered, freeze-dried, industrially produced eggs that can be shipped anywhere, stored indefinitely, and reconstituted into something that tastes like home. That is more powerful than any symbol. The essay is never published. The editor rejects it, saying it is too trivial, too focused on food, not serious enough for a journal about the war. Böll sets it aside and writes other things, novels, stories, critiques of post-war Germany. But he keeps a copy of the essay on his desk. He returns to it occasionally, reading the interviews, the descriptions of eggs and coffee and toast. He thinks about how history is written by politicians and generals, but lived by men who remember not the grand strategies, but the taste of breakfast. He thinks about how the war was won not by heroes, but by factories, by chemists who figured out how to freeze-dry eggs, by supply officers who calculated how many cans fit on a Liberty ship, by cooks who opened those cans at dawn and fed the men who would fight that day. That he thinks about how nobody remembers them, how the Quartermaster Corps does not get monuments or medals or chapters in history books, how the freeze-dried eggs are footnotes, trivia, the kind of thing that gets mentioned in passing and then forgotten. But the men who ate those eggs, the soldiers, the prisoners, the refugees, remember. They remember the taste, the warmth, the impossible abundance. They remember the moment they realized that the war was over, not because of battles or treaties, but because the enemy was feeding them breakfast. The freeze-dried eggs are not perfect. They are not indistinguishable from fresh eggs. The soldiers know the difference. The prisoners know the difference. But they are close enough. Close enough to restore morale, to prevent malnutrition, to prove that someone, somewhere, is thinking about their needs. Close enough to symbolize something larger than food, something about care, about investment, about the belief that logistics matter as much as valor, this is the quiet revolution of the Second World War. Not the atomic bomb or the radar or the code-breaking machines, though those are revolutionary too. The quiet revolution is the transformation of food from a natural resource into an industrial product. The realization that hunger is not inevitable, not a fact of war, but a failure of planning. The American military does not accept that failure. It refuses to let its soldiers go hungry, even if that means inventing new forms of food, even if that means spending millions on research and production, even if that means shipping tons of powder across oceans to make scrambled eggs in jungles and deserts and tundra, and the world notices. The Axis prisoners notice. The liberated Europeans notice. The journalists notice. After the war, when the Marshall Plan begins to rebuild Europe, one of the first priorities is food. Not just grain or meat, but industrial food. Dehydrated milk, freeze-dried vegetables, canned meat. The United States exports not just dollars, but the entire logistical infrastructure of abundance. The factories, the supply chains, the belief that scarcity is a problem to be solved, not endured. And Europe, starving and exhausted, accepts it. Not because it has a choice, but because it works. There is a photograph, taken in 1944, of a supply depot in Normandy. In the foreground, crates of freeze-dried eggs are stacked 10 feet high, each crate stamped with the Quartermaster Corps insignia and the words, dried whole eggs. In the background, soldiers are loading the crates onto trucks, which will carry them to field kitchens, where cooks will open them and make breakfast for men who are about to cross the Rhine. The photograph is mundane. It is not dramatic. There are no explosions, no generals, no flags. It is just crates and trucks and men working. But it is, in its own way, the most important photograph of the war. Because those crates represent a choice. A choice to prioritize logistics over glory, supply over spectacle, the ordinary work of feeding millions over the romantic myth of soldiers living off the land. Those crates are the reason the Allied armies can advance across France without starving. They are the reason morale holds. They are the reason American soldiers are healthier, stronger, and more effective than their German counterparts, who are scavenging turnips from frozen fields and eating bread made from sawdust. The photograph is filed in the National Archives, catalog number 111, SC 234567, and forgotten. No one exhibits it. No one studies it. It is data, not art. But it is the evidence of a truth that every soldier and every prisoner understood, even if the historians did not, that wars are won by the side that solves logistics. And in 1943, America solved the logistics of eggs. The story ends where it began. In a warehouse in Virginia, where the freeze dryers hum and the technicians monitor temperature gauges and the yellow powder accumulates in trays. The men who work here are not famous. They are chemists, engineers, factory workers. They do not storm beaches or fly bombers. They crack eggs and measure moisture content and calibrate vacuum chambers. Their work is repetitive, technical, and unglamorous. But it is essential, because the pilots who bomb Berlin eat scrambled eggs before they take off. The Marines who land on Iwo Jima eat scrambled eggs on the troopships. The nurses who save lives in field hospitals eat scrambled eggs between shifts. And the German and Japanese prisoners, sitting in camps from North Africa to the Philippines, eat scrambled eggs and realize that they were fighting an enemy. They never understood an enemy that does not ask its people to sacrifice. An enemy that industrializes abundance. An enemy that takes the humblest, most ordinary food eggs and transforms them into powder, into possibility, into proof that scarcity is not destiny. An enemy that wins wars not by outsuffering the opposition, but by outproducing it. By making so much food that it can feed its own soldiers, the enemy soldiers, the liberated civilians, the refugees, and still have cans left over in warehouses. This is the American paradox. The nation that glorifies the individual builds its strength on systems. The nation that celebrates freedom wins through discipline. The nation that markets itself as a land of plenty proves that plenty is not luck or geography, but logistics. The freeze-dried eggs are not magic. They are planning. They are investments. They are the decision to spend money and time and effort solving a problem that most nations would accept as unsolvable. They are the belief that no soldier should go hungry if hunger can be prevented. And that belief, more than any weapon or strategy, is what defeats fascism. The eggs are a weapon. Not because they kill, but because they sustain. They sustain bodies. They sustain morale. They sustain the faith that the system works, that the planners care, that the machinery of democracy is powerful enough to deliver breakfast to the other side of the world. And when the enemy realizes that, when the prisoners sit in mess halls eating scrambled eggs made from powder and understand that America is not running out, will never run out, cannot run out, that is when the war is truly over, not on the battlefield, not in the treaty rooms, but in the mind, in the quiet, devastating realization that ideology cannot compete with abundance, that sacrifice cannot defeat supply, that no amount of will or spirit or propaganda can overcome a nation that has solved the problem of feeding millions with freeze-dried eggs, and so the technicians keep working, the freeze-dryers keep humming, the cans keep filling, and across the oceans, the soldiers keep eating, keep fighting, keep advancing, fueled not by glory or rage or revenge, but by the simple, profound, revolutionary fact of breakfast.